In the heart of a burning Los Angeles neighborhood, a desperate bark pierced through the roaring flames. Keanu Reeves, sweat-soaked and unflinching, plunged into the inferno, unaware that the life he was about to save, a golden retriever named Blaze, would soon become his partner in an extraordinary battle against chaos and despair. January 10th, 2025, was a day Los Angeles burned. Not just in the flames consuming the hills, but in the panic and fear spreading like wildfire through its people. The sky was an eerie shade of red, thick with smoke that blotted out the sun. Sirens wailed in the distance, blending with the frantic shouts of evacuees. Amid the chaos, Emma stood frozen on her porch, clutching a small bag of belongings. She could hear the wildfire's ominous roar growing louder, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. Ash rained from the sky, and the air was so thick with smoke that breathing felt like a struggle. Emma knew she should leave, like most of her neighbors had, but something rooted her to the spot. Then, through the haze, she noticed movement. A man was running, no, sprinting, toward the fire-engulfed house at the end of the street. At first, Emma thought he was a firefighter. He moved with urgency, his dark jacket flapping in the hot wind. But there was no gear, no mask. As he got closer, her breath caught in her throat. "Is that Keanu Reeves?" she whispered to herself, unable to believe her eyes. The flames had almost entirely consumed the house, and yet he didn't hesitate. He kicked open the front door and disappeared inside. "What is he doing?" someone shouted from across the street. "There's nothing left in there." But then they all heard it. The frantic barking of a dog trapped inside. Emma's heart sank. She'd heard the barking earlier but assumed it was too late. Now she realized Keanu wasn't just risking his life. He was risking it for a dog. The seconds dragged on like hours, the house groaning under the strain of the fire. The roof was moments away from collapsing, and still, there was no sign of him. "Get out of there!" a man yelled toward the house, his voice breaking. Just as Emma was about to turn away, unable to watch anymore, Keanu emerged from the smoke. He stumbled, coughing, his jacket singed at the edges, but in his arms was a golden retriever, its fur blackened with soot but miraculously alive. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd before it erupted into cheers. Keanu gently set the dog down, kneeling beside it to check its paws and coat. The retriever barked once, weak but grateful, before licking his face. "Is he okay?" Emma found herself asking, stepping closer despite the searing heat. Keanu looked up, his face streaked with ash but calm as ever. "He's a fighter," he said, scratching the dog's head. The dog stayed by his side, its tail wagging faintly despite the chaos. When someone asked for the dog's name, Keanu glanced at the smoke-filled sky, then back at the retriever. "Blaze," he said softly. It was as if the dog understood, giving a bark of approval before pressing closer to Keanu. But there was no time to celebrate. The fire was spreading fast, and Keanu didn't stop to rest. With Blaze trotting loyally beside him, he moved toward the next house, scanning for anyone who might still be inside. Emma watched, her bag slipping from her hand. Something about the man and his newfound companion stirred something in her, a call to action she couldn't ignore. Grabbing a scarf to shield her face, she followed them. Blaze trotted beside Keanu, his golden fur streaked with soot but his tail wagging with determination. The bond between them was unspoken but powerful. Forged in the firestorm, they were now battling together. Emma followed close behind, her fear melting into a growing resolve. Keanu, with Blaze as his shadow, had become the heartbeat of their neighborhood, a quiet leader inspiring those around him to act. As they moved toward the next house, Blaze suddenly froze, his ears pricked and nose twitching. A faint, muffled cry came from inside. Keanu didn't hesitate. "Stay here," he said over his shoulder to Emma, but she shook her head and followed him anyway. Blaze led them to a back door, barking sharply before pawing at the base. The door was jammed, but Keanu shoved it open with his shoulder, releasing a billow of smoke that stung their eyes and lungs. Inside, the heat was suffocating. Blaze bolted forward, weaving through the thick haze, his bark a beacon for Keanu to follow. They found a woman curled up on the floor, clutching a small child to her chest. Both were coughing weakly, their strength fading fast. "I've got you," Keanu said, his voice steady as he scooped the child into his arms and motioned for Emma to help the mother. Blaze circled them protectively, his keen eyes scanning for danger as they made their way out. The moment they emerged into the open air, the crowd outside erupted into cheers. But Keanu barely acknowledged them. He set the child down gently and crouched beside Blaze, running a hand through the dog's fur. "Good work, buddy," he murmured, and Blaze wagged his tail as if to say the job wasn't done yet. The fire, relentless and unpredictable, was closing in. Keanu glanced at the group of volunteers who had started gathering supplies under Emma's direction. They were scared but determined, galvanized by his example. "We need to clear the road," he said, pointing to a path blocked by fallen tree branches and debris. "It's the only way for the fire trucks to get through." Blaze took the lead again, sniffing out clear paths and warning them of unstable ground. Together, they worked tirelessly, moving debris, guiding families to safety, and ensuring no one was left behind. At one point, Blaze stopped suddenly, barking at the entrance of a storage shed. Keanu pulled the door open to find two teenagers huddled inside, their faces streaked with tears and ash. Blaze nudged them gently, leading them toward the evacuation zone while Keanu and Emma ensured the path was clear. As night fell, the fire painted the sky in eerie shades of orange and red. The air was thick, every breath a struggle, but the makeshift team pressed on. Keanu's calm demeanor and Blaze's uncanny instincts became the backbone of their efforts. Each rescue brought a renewed sense of hope, even as the flames loomed closer. Emma, now working side by side with Keanu, couldn't help but marvel at how the actor-turned-rescuer carried himself. He didn't seek attention or accolades. Every action was deliberate, every moment spent helping someone else. Blaze, never leaving his side, seemed to embody the same quiet heroism, his every bark a rallying cry for the exhausted volunteers. Before I take you deeper into this incredible story, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever felt the kind of unbreakable bond with an animal that transcends words, hit that like button because Blaze's story is one that proves the power of loyalty and courage. By midnight, the fire had engulfed much of the neighborhood. Keanu and Blaze were still moving house to house, checking every room, every corner, making sure no one was left behind. At one house, they found an elderly man trapped by fallen beams. Blaze barked frantically until Keanu spotted him. With Emma's help, they freed the man and carried him to safety, Blaze guiding the way through the thick smoke. The fire raged on, but so did they. Keanu's determination, Blaze's unwavering loyalty, and the growing sense of solidarity among the volunteers turned what could have been a hopeless night into one of resilience and triumph. Together, they weren't just fighting a fire, they were reigniting the courage and humanity of a neighborhood on the brink. As the first light of dawn broke through the smoky sky, Blaze sat beside Keanu, his golden fur glowing in the dim sunlight. Keanu rested a hand on his companion's head, their bond stronger than ever. They had survived the night, but they both knew the fight wasn't over yet. The fire roared louder as if it were a living creature, determined to claim everything in its path. The sun, once a comforting presence, had been completely swallowed by the thick black smoke that now choked the sky. The evacuation efforts had slowed, and the volunteers were running on fumes. Keanu, sweat-drenched and streaked with ash, pressed forward despite his exhaustion. Blaze, his loyal golden retriever, stayed close, his sharp eyes and instincts ready for whatever came next. As the group moved through the neighborhood, the flames suddenly surged toward an older brick building at the edge of the street, a community center that had been left untouched until now. Emma's voice trembled as she pointed toward it. "I thought it was empty," she said. "But What if it's not? Keanu's gaze hardened. We have to check, he said, his voice calm but firm. Without hesitation, he motioned for the others to stay back. Blaze barked sharply, as if understanding the danger, but Keanu patted his head. I'll be fine. Boy, stay here with Emma. Blaze whimpered but didn't move, his eyes fixed on Keanu as he disappeared into the building. Inside, the air was hot and suffocating, the smoke so thick it was nearly impossible to see. Keanu moved carefully, his ears straining for any sound. Just as he reached the back of the building, he heard it, a faint cry. Help, please. He found a man trapped beneath a fallen beam, coughing violently as the smoke thickened around them. Hold on, Keanu said, his voice steady despite the growing heat. He crouched down, gripping the beam with both hands and using all his strength to lift it. The man crawled out, gasping for air, but just as Keanu turned to help him up, a sudden creak above warned of imminent danger. The ceiling collapsed in a fiery cascade. Keanu pushed the man forward, shielding him from the debris, but a burning plank struck Keanu's shoulder, knocking him to the ground. Pain shot through his arm as the fire closed in around him. Outside, Blaze's ears perked up. His instincts told him something was wrong. Without waiting for direction, the golden retriever bolted toward the building, his powerful legs propelling him through the open doorway and into the smoke-filled inferno. Blaze! Emma called out, but the dog was already gone. Inside, Keanu struggled to push himself up, the weight of the injury slowing him down. Blaze's sharp bark cut through the roar of the flames, and within seconds, the dog was at his side. Keanu managed a faint smile. You don't listen very well, do you? He muttered. Blaze nudged him, his movements insistent, grabbing the edge of Keanu's jacket with his teeth. The dog began pulling him toward the exit. Keanu winced with every step, but Blaze didn't falter, his determination as fierce as the flames around them. The two moved slowly, inching toward the faint outline of the doorway. The fire intensified, the heat nearly unbearable, but Blaze pushed on, his powerful frame guiding Keanu through the thick smoke. Finally, they burst through the doorway, collapsing onto the scorched grass outside. The crowd that had gathered erupted into cheers, but Emma ran forward, her face pale with worry. Keanu coughed, his voice hoarse as he looked at Blaze. He saved me, he said simply, his tone filled with awe. Blaze, despite his exhaustion, wagged his tail and licked Keanu's face. His golden fur singed but his spirit unbroken. The man they rescued was taken to safety, and Keanu's injury was quickly tended to by a volunteer with medical training. Though the pain was evident, Keanu waved off their concern. I'm fine, he said, his eyes never leaving Blaze. He's the real hero. As the fire continued to rage in the distance, the bond between man and dog had never been clearer. Blaze had not just saved Keanu's life. He had cemented their partnership in a way that words could never fully capture. Together, they had faced the worst of the flames, and they weren't done yet. What else could this unbreakable duo endure? And how would their courage inspire a community struggling to survive? The answers would come as the fight against the fire continued. But one thing was certain. Blaze and Keanu were far more than rescuers. They were symbols of hope in the darkest of times. The fire's intensity had slowed, but its threat loomed larger than ever. Keanu sat momentarily on the edge of a fire truck, his shoulder hastily bandaged. The pain was sharp, but his resolve was sharper. Blaze, resting at his feet, panted heavily, his golden fur streaked with soot but his spirit as unyielding as his human companions. Around them, the neighborhood was eerily quiet, save for the distant crackle of flames and the occasional siren. Emma approached cautiously, a bottle of water in hand. You should rest, she said softly, her eyes flicking to Blaze, who seemed to mirror her concern. Keanu took the bottle, offering her a faint smile. We rest when it's over. His voice, though hoarse, carried the same unwavering determination. Blaze barked once, as if agreeing, and Keanu ruffled the dog's ears. "What's next, boy?" he murmured, standing despite Emma's protests. Blaze rose immediately, his tail wagging with renewed energy. As they surveyed the street, a new threat emerged. A gust of wind reignited embers that had settled on a nearby warehouse. Flames erupted almost instantly, and the building became an inferno in moments. Keanu's expression tightened. "That's full of propane tanks," he said grimly. "If it blows—" Emma's eyes widened. "It'll take out everything in a 3-block radius." Blaze barked sharply, already pulling toward the direction of the fire. Keanu moved without hesitation, Emma following closely despite the fear etched on her face. Together, they reached the warehouse, where firefighters were already working frantically to contain the blaze. One of them turned, his face streaked with soot. "We can't get close enough," he yelled. "The heat's too intense. And the tanks are unstable." Keanu assessed the scene quickly. "We can't just wait for it to blow. Is there a control valve for the gas lines inside?" The firefighter hesitated, then nodded. "But no one's going in there. It's suicide." Keanu's jaw tightened. He looked down at Blaze, who stared back with the same unspoken resolve they had shared all night. "We'll get it done," Keanu said, his voice steady. Emma grabbed his arm. "Keanu, no, you're hurt. This is too much." He shook his head. "We don't have a choice." Turning to Blaze, he knelt and met the dog's eyes. "Stay close, buddy. We've got this." The pair moved toward the burning warehouse, Emma's voice fading behind them. Inside, the heat was oppressive, every breath like swallowing fire. Blaze led the way, his nose low to the ground, sniffing for the clearest path. Keanu followed, his movements deliberate but slowed by his injured shoulder. The flames roared around them, but Blaze's focus never wavered. Through the smoke, they found the control valve near the back of the building. The metal was glowing red-hot, the air around it shimmering with heat. Keanu hesitated, knowing the risk, the moment he turned the valve. There was no guarantee the tanks wouldn't ignite immediately. "Blaze, back," he said firmly, motioning for the dog to stay clear. Blaze barked in protest but obeyed, retreating several feet while keeping his watchful eyes on Keanu. Keanu reached out, his gloved hand barely able to grip the scalding metal. The pain was immediate and blinding, but he didn't stop. With a grunt of effort, he turned the valve, cutting off the gas supply. The flames hissed and sputtered, retreating slightly but not extinguished. Just as he stepped back, an explosion rocked the building. The propane tank had ruptured, sending debris flying in all directions. The blast threw Keanu off his feet, slamming him into a wall. Blaze barked frantically, darting toward him as the structure groaned under the strain of the fire. Keanu tried to push himself up, but the impact had left him dazed and barely able to move. Blaze reached him, tugging at his jacket with desperate urgency. "Go!" Keanu rasped, but Blaze refused, his growls low and insistent. The ceiling above them began to buckle. Blaze barked sharply, pulling at Keanu with all his strength. Slowly, painfully, Keanu managed to get to his knees, leaning heavily on the dog for support. Together, they stumbled toward the exit as flames licked at their heels. They burst through the door just as the roof collapsed behind them, the fire roaring in frustration. Outside, the gathered crowd erupted into cheers and relieved cries. But Keanu barely noticed. He dropped to the ground, Blaze collapsing beside him, both of them heaving for breath. Emma rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. "You're insane," she said, her voice breaking. "But thank God you're okay." Keanu looked at Blaze, his hand resting on the dog's soot-covered fur. "He's the hero," he said quietly. "I just followed his lead." Blaze, despite his exhaustion, gave a soft bark and nuzzled Keanu's hand, as if to say they were a team inseparable, unstoppable. As the warehouse fire dwindled, the danger seemed to pass. But the night was far from over. The fire was still alive, and so was the spirit of those fighting against it. What more would this unbreakable bond between man and dog achieve? And how would their courage inspire those around them to keep going? The answer, as the night stretched on, remained in the flames yet to be conquered. The fire had finally begun to retreat, its once insatiable hunger tamed by hours of relentless effort from firefighters and volunteers. The sun rose over the scorched neighborhood, casting an eerie light on what remained, a landscape of ash, blackened trees, and smoldering debris. Though the flames were subdued, the fight was not yet over. Small fires continued to flare up, and the acrid stench of smoke lingered in the air. Keanu stood near the remnants of the warehouse, Blaze resting at his feet. Both were battered, exhausted, but resolute. Emma approached with a bottle of water and a makeshift bandage for Blaze's paw, which had been scraped raw during their escape. Keanu knelt, gently cradling Blaze's paw as Emma wrapped it. The golden retriever didn't flinch, his gaze fixed on Keanu with unshakable trust. "You should both be resting," Emma said, her voice soft but firm. Keanu looked up, the faintest trace of a smile on his soot-streaked face. "Soon," he said. "But not yet." Blaze barked quietly, as if agreeing with his companion. They had come too far to stop now. Across the street, the community was coming together in ways Emma had never seen before. People who had lost their homes were sharing what little they had with their neighbors. Volunteers brought food, water, and supplies to a makeshift relief station, set up in a small park that had miraculously escaped the flames. The station had become the heart of the neighborhood, a place of refuge and resilience. Keanu and Blaze walked toward the station, their presence drawing quiet murmurs of admiration. Though neither sought attention, their actions had become a symbol of hope for everyone who had witnessed their courage. As they entered the station, a young boy ran up, his face streaked with dirt but his eyes bright. He knelt beside Blaze, hugging the dog tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling. Blaze licked the boy's cheek, his tail wagging faintly. Keanu's gaze swept the station, his expression thoughtful. "What do we need most?" he asked Emma, who had taken charge of coordinating supplies. "More water and medical kits," she replied, "and someone to help clear that road." She pointed to a path still blocked by debris, making it impossible for larger vehicles to bring in supplies. Keanu nodded. "We'll handle the road." He glanced at Blaze, who perked up instantly. "Ready, boy," Blaze barked, his tail wagging with renewed energy. Together, they joined a group of volunteers, working tirelessly to clear the path. Keanu's injured shoulder slowed him, but Blaze made up for it, pulling branches and debris with his teeth, refusing to stop until the road was passable. By midday, the first supply truck arrived, carrying fresh water and essential medicines. Cheers erupted as the community began unloading the supplies, their spirits lifted by the sight of progress. Keanu stood back, watching as neighbors worked side by side, their resilience shining brighter than the embers still smoldering in the distance. He rested a hand on Blaze's head. "This," he said quietly, "is what matters." Blaze looked up at him, his golden eyes filled with a silent understanding. Together, they had faced the worst of the flames, but it was the strength of the people around them that ensured the neighborhood would rise from the ashes. As evening fell, the flames that had once threatened to consume everything were little more than distant embers on the horizon. The firefighters, finally able to rest, gathered at the relief station, where food and blankets were being distributed. Keanu and Blaze sat off to the side, away from the attention but not unnoticed. A firefighter approached, his helmet tucked under his arm. "We couldn't have done this without you," he said, extending a hand to Keanu. "Or him," he gestured to Blaze, who wagged his tail. Keanu shook his head. "You did the real work. We just helped where we could." The firefighter smiled. "Sometimes, that's all it takes to save a neighborhood." As the stars began to appear, Emma joined Keanu and Blaze, sitting beside them in the quiet. The three of them watched as families reunited. Neighbors shared stories, and the community began to heal. Though the scars of the fire would remain, so too would the bonds forged in its wake. Keanu rested a hand on Blaze's back, his voice soft as he spoke to Emma. This is his legacy now. He's more than a dog. He's a reminder of what we're capable of when we don't give up. Blaze leaned against him, his eyes closing in contentment. The battle was over, but the story of their courage would live on, inspiring others to find strength in the face of adversity. What's next for Keanu and Blaze? Could their bond lead them to even greater challenges? Or has their most extraordinary battle already been fought? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Their story would forever be a beacon of hope for those who believed in the power of compassion, loyalty, and unrelenting courage. The morning after the fire was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The neighborhood, once vibrant and full of life, now lay under a thick layer of ash. Skeletons of burned houses stood as silent witnesses to the chaos that had unfolded. But amidst the devastation, there was something else, a sense of unity, of resilience, of hope. Keanu stood with Blaze at the edge of the relief station. The golden retriever's coat had been cleaned, but the marks of their ordeal were still visible in the form of singed fur and tired eyes. Keanu gently patted Blaze's head, the unspoken bond between them stronger than ever. Around them, the community buzzed with quiet activity. Families were helping each other rebuild. Volunteers were distributing supplies, and laughter, hesitant but genuine, was beginning to ripple through the crowd. Emma approached, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "It's not great," she said with a faint smile, handing one to Keanu. "But it's warm." Keanu took the cup, nodding his thanks. "Warm is good," he replied, his voice still hoarse from the smoke but carrying a gentleness that hadn't wavered. Blaze sat at their feet, his tail wagging lazily as children came over to pet him. He leaned into their touch, his calming presence a reminder of the heroism he had shown. A little girl knelt beside him, placing a makeshift medal she had crafted from foil around his neck. "You're our hero," she whispered, hugging him tightly. Blaze licked her cheek, his tail thumping against the ground. Keanu watched the moment unfold, a small smile playing on his lips. "He deserves it," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. The firefighters who had been battling the blaze for days came over to shake Keanu's hand. One of them, a veteran with streaks of gray in his hair, looked down at Blaze. "Never seen anything like him," the man said, his voice filled with admiration. "That dog saved lives out there." Keanu nodded, his hand resting on Blaze's back. "We saved each other," he said simply. As the day went on, the neighborhood began to show the first signs of recovery. Families were reunited, plans for rebuilding were being drawn up, and the relief station had become a hub of support and camaraderie. Keanu and Blaze moved quietly through it all, helping where they could but never seeking the spotlight. By late afternoon, Keanu stood at the edge of the park, his eyes scanning the horizon. The fire was no longer a threat, but its scars would remain for a long time. Emma joined him, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asked, her tone a mix of understanding and sadness. Keanu nodded, his gaze distant. "There's nothing more I can do here. They've got each other now. That's what matters." Emma looked down at Blaze, who sat patiently beside Keanu. "What about him?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Keanu smiled, glancing down at Blaze. "He's coming with me. We've got more work to do." Blaze barked softly, as if to confirm it. Emma chuckled, wiping at her eyes. "You're both impossible," she said. "But thank you for everything." Keanu extended a hand, and Emma took it, their grip firm and full of unspoken respect. Then, without fanfare or farewell, Keanu turned and began to walk, Blaze trotting faithfully by his side. The two figures moved down the ash-covered street, their silhouettes framed by the setting sun. Behind them, the community continued to rebuild, inspired by the courage they had witnessed. Stories of Keanu and Blaze would be told for years to come, how they had stepped into the fire not as heroes seeking glory, but as ordinary souls determined to help. They left behind more than saved lives. They left a legacy of hope, proving that even in the darkest moments, the smallest acts of courage could ignite a flame that would never be extinguished. As Keanu and Blaze disappeared over the horizon, one question lingered in the hearts of those who watched them go. Where would their journey take them next? Wherever it was. One thing was certain: the world was a better place with them in it. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between Keanu and Blaze. Now, we want to hear from you. If the story inspired you or touched your heart, please comment with the number 2 below. If you feel there's something we could have done better, please let us know by commenting with the number 7. Your feedback is not only welcome but also essential to help us grow and bring you even better stories. If you haven't already, please hit the like button and share this story with those who need a little inspiration today. And don't forget to subscribe to Tape of Worlds for more stories that celebrate the extraordinary moments in everyday life.